What is up, Bitcoiners? Welcome to Stacking Sats, the show that takes difficult to understand Bitcoin projects and breaks them down in a constructive way. My mission is to review and build all of the projects that you've seen within the Bitcoin space. I'll take you on a journey through the rabbit hole. And while I can't say who we become on the other side or what exactly we will have learned along the way, I can promise you you'll have a lot more ways to secure your Bitcoin and stack some sats. We have a lot of work to do. So let's get building. I'm your host, Trevor, and in this week's episode, we're going to be diving into the world of free and open source software and exploring its philosophical and practical implications for the Bitcoin community. Now, most of you have heard about free and open source software. I would hope so, because Bitcoin itself is free and open source software. Back in 2008, Satoshi Nakamoto created the code for Bitcoin, which is the code that we all run today. Satoshi released this code with the understanding that anyone could read, verify, and run it themselves. Now, even more remarkable, anyone can also take this code and fork it or create a new version of Bitcoin. Now, as we've seen, just because you build and create a new version of the code does not mean that that code is going to be used and ran by other people. The network effect is very strong. And due to this, we have seen projects like Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin Satoshi's Vision utterly fail. And I believe that's because there's only one way to make immaculate money, and Bitcoin did that. Now, Bitcoin did build on other projects. Satoshi Nakamoto did highlight that in the white paper of Bitcoin, but the core idea remains that Bitcoin is free and open source software that anybody can verify, anybody can read, and anybody can contribute to actually making Bitcoin's code better. Now, the reason I want to talk about free and open source software or open source is because a lot of the projects that we're going to dive into in the show have an open source history. Straight out the gate, I'm thinking things like the Bitaxe project or, the Seed Signer project. While I'm not a developer, I'm not a coder. I'm not somebody who can actually go and read the code myself or feels comfortable with contributing to bug fixes and things of that nature. I do think it's important to understand the ethos of free and open source software and kind of how it works. Now, I've done a little bit of a dive into the world of free and open source software, and I'm not going to lie, it's kind of confusing the way that it works. There's licensing that comes with it. There's, legal parameters. There's things that you're allowed to do, things that you're not allowed to do. And I'm not really going to cover too much about the technical aspects of it. A lot of it, this episode, this segment is going to be just talking about the practical implications of free and open source software and why that matters to us as builders trying to build things within the Bitcoin industry. So there is an ethos around free and open source software, and that ethos has to do with openness and collaboration. The idea is that anyone can come in and update, download, contribute to the source code. And because there's a large network of people working on that code, the developments can happen a lot sooner and they have a lot wider range of applications within the industry. When you think about closed source software, that means that there's a centralized party that has complete control over the code and isn't allowing it to be messed with, tampered with, updated, or contributed by the general community. This has much more meaningful implications because now progress can be made much faster, and you can actually take code and copy it and use it in your own applications or your own processes. Whether someone else uses it or not, you can use that code. Now, obviously, for Bitcoin, it's a little different because in order to create money that everyone will use, you have to have the biggest, largest network effect. As many people have seen, you can't just take Bitcoin code, fork it, make your own version of it, and expect it to run flawlessly and bring people in. I definitely want to touch on why free and open source software matters. I kind of alluded to it a little bit, but there's transparency, Users can verify the code that they're using. There's community collaboration, so developers can contribute bug fixes and usability improvements. There's decentralization, which in Bitcoin, we're all about decentralizing, whether it's decentralizing the hardware, decentralizing the actual Bitcoins themselves, whether it's decentralizing the manufacturers or the code. Unlike closed source code, where a single entity controls the development, FOSS, or free and open source software, thrives on community-driven efforts. So what are some of the practical benefits of free and open source software within Bitcoin? Free and open source software isn't just theoretical. It has real-world applications within the Bitcoin ecosystem and beyond. I'm thinking of Tor, which is an application that allows users to search the internet and connect with others without having their data siphoned off. I'm also thinking of Nostr, which enables users to sign and verify events using a set of key pairs, which allows the user to remain anonymous while communicating with others. As long as you trust the keys that a person is using, you can pretty much verify that you are communicating with the person you intended to. As I alluded to, some of the other projects are the Bitaxe and the Seed Signer, which are projects that we're going to dive into specifically in this show. I have a lot of things planned for the Bitaxe, and I want to build a Seed Signer to show people how to create a hardware wallet that secures your privacy. There are countless of other projects within and without the Bitcoin space that are built using free and open source software. We're not really going to dive too far into them. Again, I'm not trying to tell you how free and open source software works. I'm really just trying to give you an idea of why it's important to us as builders. So why does free and open source software matter to you and to me? First is that it empowers individuals. It empowers us to build and innovate without centralized restrictions. This is in perfect alignment with Bitcoin's decentralized philosophy, and it's important that you take control over your tools, your privacy, and your Bitcoin-related activities. Privacy and security is something that goes hand in hand, and free and open source software enables this. So as someone who isn't a developer or a coder, you might be wondering why is this important? I think it's pretty simple. So much of what we're building within the Bitcoin space relies on open source code. Again, Bitcoin's code is free and open source. This free and open source software is empowering individuals to create, adapt, and innovate without centralized restrictions. My intention with the show is to build projects that use and are created from free and open source software. And I want to show the audience how those processes work. Whether we're building a hardware wallet or nodes or Bitcoin space heaters, a lot of what we're building derives from free and open source software. I think it's important to highlight that while anyone can build on free and open source software, not necessarily everyone should. There's a reason why in Bitcoin Core, there is a set of core developers. Now, I'm not saying that these are the arbiters of the decision-making process, because anybody can propose a Bitcoin improvement protocol or a BIP. In fact, there's been tons of Bitcoin improvement protocols. Not every single one has been implemented because some of them aren't necessarily in line with Bitcoin's ethos, and some of them might actually break things that when you're trying to fix them. My whole point is some people aren't meant to develop code for open source, and that's fine. I myself will not be contributing to any codes or any free and open source software anytime soon. I'm not a coder. I don't find that stuff exciting. But the simple fact remains that because Bitcoin and the Bitaxe project and things like Nostr and Tor are open source, if I did want to check and verify the source code, I could. Versus other projects like some of the Bitcoin miners that we see in the network or in the space, you can't go and verify that. And because you can't verify it, how do you know that there isn't malicious code inside of the piece of hardware? You can't. And unless you're very technical and are willing to do a deep dive and possibly break things, there's really no way to find out. All of that being said, I think it's important to understand why we should work on free and open source software, why we should contribute to free and open source software, and why we should use it. Bitcoin's ethos is all about decentralization. It's all about privacy and security, and it's all about freedom. But with that freedom comes responsibility. We're not here to just break things blatantly. We want to make sure that what we're doing is contributing to the overall growth of the Bitcoin network. For the purposes of our show today, we just need to understand that free and open source software means that anyone can contribute to it. It's decentralized and it's generally acceptable to build and iterate upon. I know this segment was kind of short. There's not really too much that I want to dive into regarding free and open source software. I'm trying to set the scene for some of the projects that we're going to build in the future. Now, what we can expect in the next segment is an interview with Scott 9000, who is the developer of our little Bitaxe project codes. The reason why I'm bringing Scott on is because I want to dive more into his thought process behind using free and open source software to develop the code for the Bitaxe. We've seen the Bitaxe proliferate over the last year. We've seen so many projects come out, so many different iterations of the Bitaxe, and I think it's a great project. I think it's something that every home miner should have in their house. And so we're going to ask him a couple of questions regarding why he embraced free and open source software, what the inspiration was behind the Bitaxe, and where he sees the future of Bitcoin mining going because of free and open source software. In regards to the Bitaxe build sheets that we're going to do in the future, I think I'm going to do an overview of the Bitaxe itself before I actually start diving into some of the things that can be built with the Bitaxe. I do want to build a hydro-cooled Bitaxe and an immersion Bitaxe, but I'm not sure if we're going to try to pack everything into one week's worth of episodes or if we're going to break it into different episodes. So I haven't quite figured that out yet. But rest assured, we are going to be diving into the Bitaxe itself and maybe even building one ourselves, or at least attempting to. I don't have very good soldering skills, and maybe my skills need to come up to par before we can actually get one of those up and running. But there's a lot of things to learn when it comes to the Bitaxe, whether it's updating the firmware, downloading the source code, actually soldering the chips, or upgrading the cooling solution. There's a lot of things we can learn. So I am excited to dive into that project specifically. I think the next episode after this one is going to be a dive into the Loki rig. I just kind of want to show you all the components. I want to show you how you can build one yourself. On Wednesday, we will be doing a interview with Scott 9000. And on Friday, we'll just kind of overview everything that we've learned and explain again why it's so important. And then next week, we can expect to dive into the Loki rig. My call to action for you guys is, if you're enjoying this, if you think it's a cool idea, if you want to see more, subscribe and like, share it out, show it to your friends. If you have any open source projects that you've been working on or Bitcoin heat reuse projects that you've been working on, I would love for you to share them in the chat. I'm constantly looking for projects to build or things to dive into. So definitely share that with me. If you guys want to support the show, there is going to be a Bitcoin wallet in there, and we use all those funds to build out some of these projects and give them away to the community. So there is that link in there. Also, I will have any affiliate links for the show added there as well. These are, some easy ways, low-cost ways to help the show so that we can grow. But with that, guys, this has been the first segment, episode 2 of Stacking Sats. Remember, we have a lot of work to do, so let's get stacking.